Hi, and now we're in Lifestyle Management. We're looking at Chapter 16, Part 2. Now this one we're going to look at, for the most part, we'll be looking at the impact on you and I, our health, and the environmental issues that might come up in our lives. So let's get started with Part 2. So the environment and our health. Well, the Canadian Public Health Association has published an important document that reminds us that ecological determinants of health, oxygen, water, and food, are also inextricably linked to our overall well-being as well. So what my meaning by that is that these ecological determinants of health, oxygen, water, and food, kind of critical to our health, and in environmental implications, those two things are linked. Those determinants and environmental conditions. The current state of our ecosystem is in peril by many scientists' perspective, and human action is affecting all three of these biological determinants, ecological determinants, oxygen, water, and food. So let's begin with environment and physical health. No individual is immune to the effects of changes in the environment. 25%, 1/4 of all deaths and disease globally can be linked to environmental factors such as exposure to harmful elements in the air, in the water, in the soil, and food that have been found to cause respiratory or cardiovascular disease, as well as certain cancers. That's a huge number linked to things that are preventable. That's pretty sobering. If we step it back a bit and look at environment and the psychosocial health, a strong relationship to the location or place is essential for human health. Shifting climates can complicate and destabilize that sense of attachment. Now what I mean by that is our connection to where we live is very important to our own personal health. The fact that you've chosen to come to Owen Sound or Barrie or Orillia or southwestern Ontario is important because your family might be there, your friends, the things that you like to participate in, skiing, hiking, canoeing, boating. This is what all makes our sense of place important to us. And so the focus is on our psychosocial health will be important as we attempt to adapt to environmental changes. Not everybody gets to remain where they are because of some of these environmental changes, and that detachment or destabilization of one's location or place, people being moved because of floods or droughts. It may not be happening here in Canada and southwestern Ontario, but it's certainly happening in other parts of the world. So let's consider some of the other effects of things like the impact of pollution. Any change in air, water, or soil that can reduce its abilities to support life is a form of pollution. The effects of pollution depend on the concentration of the pollutant, how long it remains in the environment, and its chemical nature. Now, for example, here in Owen Sound, there is land by the water which would be great for people to have houses or some sort of a building effect, but they can't build until they remove a big chunk of the soil because it's been contaminated by a previous industry that was there years ago, shipbuilding and metal smelting, that affects the soil. And so that could affect the people who live there if it's not all dug up and replaced with clean, neutral soil. Environmental agents that trigger changes in the genetic material of living cells are called mutagens. Mutagens that cross the placenta of a pregnant woman and cause spontaneous abortions and birth defects in fetuses is called teratogens. That's profound. A variety of health problems that have been linked with pollution toxic substances can enter the body through your lungs, through our digestive system, and through skin contact. That combined interaction of two or more hazards can produce the effects greater than either one alone. So we have to be conscious of the world around us because it can impact us in ways we don't really think they can. Cleaning the air. Well, air pollution of any sort can cause numerous ill effects, including chronic bronchitis, emphysema, heart disease, cancer, and weakening immunity. Now, this can be anything from something as benign as sanding the floors of a house that you're living in or doing drywall, that fine particles, running while you're in a city and near a very heavily used road system. You have the emissions from the cars, not only that which you see, the smog, but also that which you cannot see, the nanoparticles. When you think about tires, rubber running around on road, just because you can't see the wear of the tires doesn't mean there aren't tiny particles flying through the air. And it's those things that can, over time, affect our immune system. Now, the thing that if you've ever been to Toronto or any other large city in North America or in the world, you're familiar with the term smog. Now, smog is a combination of smoke and fog. Smog is made up of chemical vapors and auto exhaust, industrial and commercial pollutants, and ozone that reacts with sunlight. Now, it's important to note, I've mentioned there, these are chemical vapors. These are minute particles floating in raindrops, if you will, mist. And these are not things that we see, but we also don't know what's in them, what stuff makes its way into the air and then attaches itself to these, vapors that can affect you and I. Sulfur dioxide smog is produced by burning oil of high sulfur content. Photochemical smog is also found in large traffic centers and results principally from nitric oxide in a car exhaust reacting with oxygen in the air and forming nitrogen dioxide, which produces a brownish haze and when exposed to sunlight and other pollutants. Ozone is the most widespread pollutant and can impair a body's immune system and cause long-term lung damage. Now, these are certainly, and it's a very swift overview on some of the outside elements in the air, but of course there are indoor pollutants as well. Since people in industrialized nations spend more than 90% of their time inside buildings, the quality of the air they breathe can have even a greater impact on their well-being than outdoor pollutants. The most hazardous form of indoor air pollution is, what do you imagine? Carpets, paint, cigarette smoke. One other indoor pollutant viewed as an environmental risk is mold. And if you know somebody sensitive to mold, you know the impact that can have. And certainly mold can get into your system through the air without you really being aware of it. And if ever you've had black mold in a house and you've had it eradicated, you know what the role of that is, and you can probably have had some understanding of that. So if you look at figure 16.3 on page 436 for additional indoor pollutants and the effects they can have on our health. Now, something that's probably, it's very important and probably more so than you think in terms of your own self is the quality of our drinking water. Any water sold in sealed containers is considered to be bottled water. And although bottled water is usually disinfected to remove harmful organisms, many studies have shown that bacteria are found in the most bottled waters. Now, refrigeration is recommended after you open your bottled water. You might have been aware of the recent discovery, this was only within the last 2 weeks, of what are known as microplastics that have been found in bottled water. Now, I think I put a graphic up here to show you the study that was done and what's found in bottled water. Some of this microplastic that's found in bottled water is more than what we find in our own tap water. Another concern is the fact that large quantities of water have been removed from local water sources, and 9 of 10 plastic bottles end up in garbage rather than in recycling. They take more than 1,000 years to biodegrade. I had mentioned earlier about the gyres. These are just huge islands of plastic that get blown in from the wind because bottles aren't, not just bottles, plastic bags just don't get put in recycling. They get left out where the wind can take them and find their way back into the ocean. Now, something that's used in water and it can be helpful is fluoride. In Canada, most of us are exposed to fluorides on a daily basis, though through trace amounts found in our food and the fluoride that's added to our drinking water supply is to prevent tooth decay. The risks of using fluorides appear to be very small. Now, Health Canada has set labeling requirements for dental products such as toothpaste that contain fluoride, and many young children tend to swallow these products, toothpaste. Maybe you have yourself. So there are limits to how much can be put into those products to limit the effect that it has on our health, but it's there to help strengthen our teeth. Chlorine is another product that's put in our water. Chlorine is a disinfectant, and it's added to our drinking water to reduce or eliminate microorganisms such as bacteria and viruses. Now, many Canadians are becoming concerned about chlorinated water supplies, and a number of cities are now using ozone to disinfect the water. So we become more aware, and as a collective, we can have an impact on what happens. So some chemicals that we might be at risk for, and some of these you will be familiar with, and most notably would be pesticides. Now, pesticides are toxic. They purchases only domestic class products bearing the PCP registration number. We have regulations as to what can be sold, but it's important to remember that even though it can be sold at Canadian Tire, for example, that you use protective clothing when using pesticides. Gloves, perhaps a mask, even especially if you're working outdoors with them and it's a windy day, those aerosols get back into your lungs. When you're done, wash face and hands with soapy water, and clean your clothing separately from other clothing items. It gives you an idea of how damaging some of these pesticides can be. What health risks are caused by pesticides? Well, there's a number of them, and I'll just review a few things. Endocrine disruptors. These are chemicals that act on or interfere with human hormones, particularly estrogen, which may pose a threat to fertility, falling sperm counts, and cancers to reproductive organs. Chlorinated hydrocarbons include several high-risk substances that may cause cancer, birth defects, neurological disorders, and damage to wildlife and the environment. And then organic phosphates. These include chemicals such as malathin. They break down they break down much more rapidly than the chlorinated hydrocarbons, and most of them are very highly toxic. Usually they'll indicate in the labeling, so make sure you read everything carefully. Now, because of the kind of day and age that we're in, and it's been a recent thing in the news recently around chemical weapons, in particular terrorist threats and weapons of war, have included the use of chemical weapons. And maybe you've heard of the Russian in Britain and his daughter that were exposed to a chemical nerve agent. That was an aerosol, they are assuming, which means that others may have been affected, and the outcomes are always bad with this particular nerve gas. Chemical weapons can be used to contaminate soil, air, or water quality anywhere in the world. Bioterror agents include poison gases, herbicides, and other types of chemical substances that can kill, maim, or temporarily incapacitate someone. Chemical weapons can kill rapidly or they can kill slowly. Possible protections include gas masks, shelters, or sealed suits in vehicles. Some of the more common chemicals used are ricin, sarin, and another one known as FX. More common to our experience than bioterror has been is chemicals in cosmetics. Some 10,500 industrial chemicals are used as cosmetic ingredients. Some of these ingredients are known as carcinogens, pesticides, endocrine disruptors, and plasticiers. Now, a report indicates that almost 80% of all cosmetics and personal care products in Canada contain at least one of the 12 chemicals known as the Dirty Dozen. And it's linked to health and environmental concerns. These can be anything from the types of plastics that are being used, microbeads, as well as other chemicals. Now, there are loopholes in the National Cosmetic Regulation that allow for an incomplete ingredient list on many personal care items. Now, you're seeing beside me here is a group of what is known as the Dirty Dozen. You'll find this list in page 440 on your textbook. Usage of microplastics should also be reduced. They can persist in our environment for centuries. And on a different note, they become indistinguishable to you and I, but to many of the ocean's marine life, they look like food. And it's becoming a very, very big issue around finding animals either wrapped up in or having fed on plastics. Some invisible hazards, and these aren't things that maybe you normally think about. Electromagnetic fields and radiation. Probably don't think about it a lot. However, electromagnetic fields, or EMFs, consist of any electrically charged conductor that generates two kinds of invisible fields, the electric and the magnetic. Now, these could include microwaves, computers, TVs, radios, so clearly we are among them. Laboratory research on animals has shown that alternating current, which changes strength and direction 60 times a second, emits an EMF that may interfere with the normal functioning of human cell membranes. The result may be mood disorders, changes in the circadian rhythm. These are the rhythms that help us know when it's daytime, nighttime, and what we should be doing in the daytime, and we should be sleeping at night. If you're on shift work, you know how that can really mess up your sleep. It's messing up your circadian rhythm. These EMFs are also linked to miscarriages, developmental problems, even cancer. So scientists at Health Canada have determined that the evidence is not strong enough to conclude that EMFs definitively cause cancer and suggest more studies are needed. And there's been a lot of studies that have been engaged looking at EMFs. A new concern, and it's not absolutely new, but it's one that I'm sure you're familiar with, has to do with cell phone use. There are scientists that have found elevated risk of tumors in cell phone users compared to with people who rarely or never use cell phones. The risk was highest among those who had used cell phones for 10 years or more. And so that puts a good chunk of the population at some degree of risk, yet unknown. Some other environmental issues that can affect our health. Irradiated food. Now, the use of radiation on food from either radioactive substances or devices that produce an X-ray is known as irradiation. And its primary benefit is to prolong the life of food's useful life. So that's why some of the food, for example, in canned goods, can last as long on the shelf as they do. Irradiated foods are believed to be safe to eat, and in Canada, several federal agencies are involved in regulating aspects of food irradiation processes. Multiple chemical sensitivity. The proliferation of chemicals in modern everyday life has been a new disease, multiple chemical sensitivity, or MCS. There is no agreed upon definition for the condition. There's no medical test that can diagnose it, and there's no proven treatment. Symptoms can include chest pain, depression, difficulty remembering, dizziness, fatigue, headaches, inability to concentrate, nausea, headaches and pains in the muscles and joints. One that you might be familiar with or know someone who is noise pollution. Impaired hearing is increased, especially among young people. Hearing loss can have an impact on speech and language, literacy, as well as social development. Loudness, or the intensity of sound, is measured in decibels. Sounds under 70 decibel do not seem harmful. Most hearing loss occurs on the job. Noise-induced hearing loss is 100% preventable. It is also, unfortunately, irreversible. High volumes of sound have been linked to high blood pressure and other stress-related problems that can lead to heart disease, insomnia, anxiety, headaches, colitis, and ulcers. Most of us have been to concerts and sat by the speakers and headbanged ourselves to death for 2 or 3 hours. But it's that kind of sound over the long haul. What it's doing is that sound, if you're familiar with the anatomy of your ear, you have, the eardrum, but it inserts into the cochlea, which is a snail-like shape in our ear, and in that has little tiny hairs. It's those hairs that help detect and resonate that makes the sound that our brain interprets into the music or the talking that we hear. Volume up so high, those hairs get damaged. Once they're damaged, they're gone. And we start to lose capacity to hear certain ranges of sounds. And that's where noise pollution becomes a big issue. All right. That is the end of part 2. Environmental health. I hope it's been an interesting and valuable chapter for you, and we've got 2 weeks left. Thank you, everybody. Keep up the good work. Bye now.